All right, guys. Last week it was mostly just Rick and I that were doing all the talking, and so I think it's important this week that we hear from different people. And I know some of you guys have some things that you want to share. I think the most important thing is that we listen to each other. Not all of our opinions are going to be the same. We're not all going to agree on a lot of these things, but as long as we come with open ears and open hearts, then I think that we at least have an opportunity to meet somewhere in the middle and find some common ground in some areas that maybe we previously hadn't had an understanding or hadn't had any common ground on.
There's just a different level of clarity. I feel like in the past, there was nothing that I would say I wouldn't have supported the things that were going on, but all of a sudden, it was like a new level of understanding and empathy. And I don't know, God just took me to this other level where everything became more clear to me. And in the past, I mean, I would say with every unjust death, it hurt me. I would, grieve with the things that were going on. I would worry about my brothers, Malcolm and William, and their kids, my nieces, my future nephews, and how that would affect them. So there was, each of those times it would bother me, but this time there was something different that happened. And I think one of the first things that started was, Chris actually had a conversation with William and Malcolm, and that was on Friday night. And I didn't get to really be a part of that. I was kind of inside getting my hair done and fixing dinner, but I could hear some parts that were going on. And then thankfully the next day, Chris and I drove down to Dallas, and we really just got to be in this discussion and him share with me, when he sat down and was like, guys, talk to me. Like, what are you feeling? What's going on? Like, what can we do? How can I be better? And in the past, I felt like I support what's going on, but I'm in no place to talk. I'm, some white guy. What am I going to say? And then now I'm seeing like my silence, is not the way to support this. And so from that, it allowed them to have this conversation. And then I think it was maybe Sunday morning was whenever I first listened to or Sunday afternoon, the interview between Carl Lentz and TD Jakes. And I know several of you guys have watched that, but for those watching the replay, I'll just say it wrecked me. I mean, it totally that was what really just put things like really, it's like I knew stuff before, but I mean, that's when it just got me where I knew it. One of his first illustrations was talking about child abuse and how, whenever an abused child goes through and they're going through counseling later, that the abuser is the one who, they obviously have hurt towards the abuser. But then he said it was the parent that stood by silently and did nothing. And that caused just as much pain to them because you knew that I was in this pain and you didn't stop it and you didn't say anything. And that silence was abuse. And man, that to me, I was like, wow, that's right. I can't just sit here silently and say, yep, I support them. Yes, I agree. Like now, no, we've got to say something now. And then he also talked about the story of the Good Samaritan and how everybody, the focus is always on the Samaritan, the one who stopped and helped the one who was, badly beaten. And he said, what we don't talk about is the priest and the Levite and that they walked by. And he said the church has walked by for years. And that's what that represents is the church walking by and not turning their head and like, we're not going to touch that. Like, yeah, that's bad. Ooh, man, that really stinks for them. That sucks. That must be painful. But no, but I can't really say anything. And that also hurt. I mean, that was also just very eye-opening. And that's one of the things that coming out of this. I mean, this isn't a new fight. You guys, everyone knows that. But I do feel like it's a new shift. I see churches all across America. I see companies, I see organizations, everyone stepping up and saying, wait, this is not just like a this or that. Black Lives Matter. I'm willing to say it now. I'm not going to just like my company, in the past, that we've got all kinds of initiatives, African ancestry initiatives, as well as, you can be in it just as an ally, like all of the words are there, all of the support is there. But this time around, they came out and they said, here, let's get on a call and let's just share with you the things that, our leaders, both white and Black, are going to say, this is what we're going through. Here's what we can do. Black Lives Matter. And they're not shying away from it. And I do feel like the shift is different this time. We, you know, took the kids and went to a George Floyd march, and the range of the diversity there, from ethnicity diversity, ages, demographically. I mean, there's everyone was there. It was, and it definitely, I feel like, a shift across social media. Yes, there are still some, you know, there's all kinds of other people out there, but there's so many more now saying, I'm going to listen, I'm going to stop, I'm going to listen, and I'm going to learn. And then, you know, you've got the white community saying that, and the Black community said, okay, are you really ready to listen? Because here, let me share with you my pain, and let me share with you what we're going through. And so many of them are willing to say, wow. And whenever it comes to things like privilege, those things that in the past, there's a quote that says, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And that was true. And it was one of those things, because I mean, we've heard white privilege. And as somebody, I mean, you know, I'm not completely white. I'm half Mexican, half white, but I'm white enough. And so I would look at that and be like, well, I didn't come from money. I have no privilege. I worked hard to get what I did and all of that. But then this time around, they're saying, wait, you don't understand what privilege really is. Let's explain what privilege is. And, you know, when Chris and I were talking, I'm like, man, to me, privilege is, you know, not being nervous for my life whenever I'm stopped by police. Not when he turns around, I'm like, shoot, maybe I can smile, go big enough, and not get a ticket. Not, hopefully I can keep my hands on 10 and 2, say yes, sir, no, sir, and not get pulled out of the car. I mean, that doesn't even kind of cross my mind. You know, it's also, I told Chris, it's not, whenever he gets pulled over, it's not me pulling out my cell phone to video it. Why? Because I don't even kind of think that there may be something that I need to make sure to document and make sure to keep them in check, because I don't even have a thought that they would pull him out of the car. And that was the other thing we talked about. How many of these have not been filmed? I mean, we started thinking, wow, you know what? Most of these hashtag names are because we have video evidence that we just happen to catch all of them on video. No, that's not what's happening. There's so much more out there that we're, you know, that's concerning. Obviously, that's really bad. It's like I said, not putting my hands on 10 and 2. In fact, it's when I get pulled over, I'm fumbling in the back seat trying to find my license. I'm pulling, you know, running through my glove box to find. I don't even think to. In fact, I told a story the other day. We got pulled over and we were running late for something. I was in the passenger. I got out of the car and went to the ATM while the police was running my tag. Why? I didn't think about it. You know what she did? She said, hey, next time don't get out of the car. I was like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that is white privilege. Like that is not something that any Black person would ever do or think to do, and they would know not to do, because I didn't even have the second thought of it. In fact, one of my it was the coworkers had heard this story of one of our other coworkers, how he had gone with a car full of they'd gone to a town he was driving, and got stopped for, like, it was something that he didn't do, like running a red light, and everybody agreed he didn't. They literally pulled him out of the car in front of his coworkers, put him on the hood, searched him down, and he, sharing now through our firm, and he said, that happened a few years ago. He's like, it was the most embarrassing thing ever. And I had to just get back in the car, and all of my white coworkers, nobody said anything. We never talked about it again. And everybody was just humiliated. And he's like, I went back to my hotel room and I cried. And that, to me, I mean, that's the stuff we don't think of. It's things like Malcolm saying, I keep my windows in my truck tinted really dark so that they can't look in and see my skin color, but they have to actually pull me over for driving issues. That's the type of things. And I'd say for us, like, I feel like we had taught our kids about discrimination. We tried to be intentional. We try to make sure to watch, different movies that come out so that we can have that dialogue with them. But I realized that we'd focused on the times of slavery and the times of civil rights. And we've done a lot of that teaching. We've done a lot of those movies, and we've talked about it and said, this. And I've always had the thought, like, what, where would I be? Like, would I have stood up for what I know right now is right? But when you're surrounded by all of it, what would I have been and what would I have done? And so So now I'm like, this is the opportunity that we have to be, like Rick said, on the right side of history. We can look back and say, this was the moment that we did what was right. And so what we've realized is that we're trying to implement more like current event movies, like the now. So one of the ones that we watched was The Hate U Give. And it's very relevant to like, this is what we're going through now, and watched it with them and said, this is what we're dealing with right here. Whenever this is what it's like. And that is a great one to show what the struggles are within the Black community, and then the relationship with the police, and how that conflict happens, and why they're in those positions. Let me see. I've got so much that I wish I did, but I know I'm supposed to only do 10 minutes or so. The other thing, one thing that Rick had talked about was something about, the history books. And so when TD said, you always win in the books that you write. And oh man, I just started, yeah, gosh, you're right. It reminded me of the show I think I've told you guys about called The Man in the High Castle, where it's an alternate universe where the Axis powers won World War II. And so we look in like half of the US is controlled by Nazis and half by Japan. And the history is being rewritten at that point. And they've gone back and they start tearing down, our own, this has been 20 years later. So our own kids are starting to go back against things like the Statue of Liberty and all these things like, oh, this is a horrible, history that we have. And so I started thinking about it and looking into it more, and things like inventions. So, patents weren't allowed to be held by non-Americans. So during this time of slavery, there were inventions. It's not like it's now, obviously, we know there's a lot of Black people who are incredibly smart. You think that they just like weren't around then? Like, no, they were incredibly smart, everybody. So whenever I started looking at things like this, like Eli Whitney, who invented the cotton gin, like why would he have invented the cotton gin? No, he didn't. Slaves invented it because they were trying to make their own job easier, but yet they didn't get the credit for it. If you ask anybody who paid attention in history class who invented the cotton gin, everyone says Eli Whitney. And no, he became a multimillionaire from it. And no, he's not the one who invented it. He's the one who got the patent for it because his slaves were the ones who invented it. I mean, it just totally just started, I started understanding things. Things like Hidden Figures, the movie that I'm sure you guys have watched, where you've got just in the 1960s, I mean, that's not that long ago, guys, like several of you were born then. And it's for sure like when our grandparents, for the other ones of us who were like the next generation, they were adults at that point. You had these mathematician, incredibly smart group of women. So there's both things there, both women, and they were Black women who were helping with the space race, and they never got credit for it. Now think about how if they go home and they can't, like, how do you go tell your kid, guess what? Be smart, work hard, get an education, go to work, do something amazing, and get no credit for it. Your turn. You go do that. What if your grandparents had done that? I mean, how in the world would you have gotten I wouldn't have. I'd have been like, man, that sucks. Like, I did a lot of work. I thought this was the moment. Like, if I could get here, something would shift, something would change for us. And if it didn't, how do you come back and say, okay, now next generation, you guys try again. See if we got it again. And no, when you've got this whole cycle. Anyways, I probably have way too much to share. So I will probably pass it on to somebody else who I'm sure will touch on all the other things that there are going on in this time.
No, keep going.
We're fired up.
Yeah,
Are
keep
you
going.
sure?
Because I mean, it's obvious that you've got some more things to share.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I will. So the next thing that I really started thinking about was, how far have you advanced from your own parents, right? So I looked into that, and turns out we don't advance very far. There's some outliers here who, if your parents were really low class, that you were able to push up, or maybe they're like middle class and you just like became a billionaire, But on the whole, we don't take very many steps forward, both educationally, financially, social status. We are just a couple of steps, if not similar to where our parents are. And that's all of you. That's all white people too. Like, that's everyone. We don't advance that much further than where our parents are. Society changes, there's shifts, and we've got more advances, but in general, like class level, we don't advance very far. So if you think about it, just in 1954 was the first school was desegregated, right? So then that actually went through the 60s and the 70s. That's when schools were I mean, so up until that point, even voting rights, all of that was happening in the 60s. That's not that 55 years ago. Again, some people on this call that you were alive then already. And then your parents were for sure. I mean, it's my grandparents, that was their generation. And so the amount that you could ask somebody for any of us to go advance from there, but much less you take them back and you say, now you start from back here, because just 2 generations ago, you're back here. My family's right here. Now see how far you can go. And you can't look back from here and go, well, how come? I mean, we made everything equal. Like they've got as much ability as we do to advance themselves. Why can't they? Why can't they get out there, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get out there and work? Well, turns out they started back here. Like we pushed them back so far and then said, now see if you can catch up with us. You can't catch up? Well, that's on you. Well, that's not. Well, I mean, so not really, really. And that doesn't say anything about, all of the issues with property taxes being used to fund schools. And then in turn, that means the lowest income areas have the lowest funding for schools. And it's just a cycle that that you can't push past, which leads into systemic racism, right? Where and by far, I'm not going to even touch on everything on that, but the things that jumped out at me was understanding these things like redlining that happened. And that was, again, it went all the way up until 68. Like that's not that long ago, where the banks would, if you don't know what it is, because truthfully, I kind of had heard the topic, but I didn't really know that banks were, circling areas of cities and that said, and it was red lines and said, we are not going to loan here, which means they're not going to get mortgages, which means they can't get better housing. And all of that ties back into not being able to advance, not being able to push past where it's being, where you're being kept when you're in low risk. So we abolished that in 68, right? But not really, because there were things like subprime lending, and that targeted them. That was targeting that there's high interest subprime loans to low income and minority neighborhoods. Just, again, perpetuating the place that just pushing further behind where everyone else could get, everyone else is starting here, and you're saying, now you guys go right here and start, and then see if you can catch up. And then even up till 2014, so there's a bank in New Jersey, they had 1,900 mortgages during that year and only 25 to Black applicants. 2014, this is still happening. And they got sued for it, but that's because it was still going on. So now we have a more politically correct way. We don't call it redlining. We don't call it these things, but it's still happening. And then even just at the very tip of the iceberg is the criminal justice system, looking into it. So traffic stop rates, almost 50% more, or the Black community, Black people are getting stopped 50% more than white. But that number is only that high in the daytime, where they can see in the cars, and the veil of night is not shifting it to where it's more equal and they're getting stopped for just traffic incidents. I mean, it's so clear, like it's that if that's not racial profiling, I mean, I don't even understand. So also Hispanic and Black drivers are searched twice as often as whites, even though less than 3% of those searches actually produce any evidence. So 97% of Black Americans who are stopped and searched, they're taken out of the car. You don't get searched while you're in the car, right? That's those people. That's when you're laid on the car getting searched while everyone drives by, where the 4 coworkers are sitting in your car watching you. There's zero evidence found. There is nothing for that. Just like my coworker, 97 times that happens. 97 men or women, Black women, that happens too. And they find nothing on them. They just do it. Arrests for petty crime, it happens Black Americans twice as much. And that's for disorderly conduct, drug possession. So arresting. So in other words, they're getting arrested. White people get arrested for that stuff too sometimes, but it happens twice as much Black people are getting arrested whenever this is found. Sorry, they do this often, but Black Americans are getting arrested twice as much. Marijuana possession, 3.5 times as much. So then it goes down. Cash bail amount, jury selection, plea bargaining, sentencing, paroles, pardons, all of those. The numbers are shifted so far different. And it's not because there's not white Americans out there doing these things. It's not that there's white Americans. This is looking at it and saying, if you're Black, does this happen? If you're white, does this happen? And it's happening worse off. They're all of those numbers are completely slanted. And then the other one is Black men being pulled over for driving nice cars. Now that bothers me so much, because if you are any individual, Black, white, Hispanic, whatever, and you have worked hard enough to get it to where you have bought a nice car, and now just for driving a nice car, you're getting stopped for driving because you're Black and you drove a nice car, and they think it couldn't possibly be yours. That is so wrong and so bad, and the numbers are staggering. And I mean, that is what I've talked to people, read things, and they're literally driving less nice cars than they could so that they don't get stopped, because they're getting stopped 6 times a year for no reason, just pulling you over. What did I do? Nothing. Whose car is this? The other thing. So yes, sorry, Chris hollered something to me. And then the other piece would be drug use. Yes. So white and the white community and Black community use drugs. Whites and Blacks use drugs about the same percentage. Like there's more whites in America than there are Blacks. So if you take all those into account, the percentage is the same of how much drug use we have. And I want to say it is, I don't remember the numbers. They are 3 to 1. What is it? That's right. Yes. They are 6 times more likely to get arrested instead of just get away with it or sent to rehab than Black Americans are. They will go to jail and they will spend more time in jail. Their sentences are longer for doing the exact same thing. And that's one of the things that TD said. He said, if you live in one side of Chicago and you have a drug problem, you have a sickness and you get sent to rehab. And then if you live in the other side, you get arrested and you get sent to prison. And one of the things that just broke my heart was whenever I started thinking about that and thinking about how, a lot of this is the broken homes in the Black community, and that there's no fathers around, and that's why, they don't have the respect and all of this stuff. And then to look at that number alone and just say, we can't put their daddies in prison and then blame them for not having daddies to raise them. It's just wrong. So anyways, yes, I have become very passionate about this as I've looked into it and understood, just started seeing things from a different perspective. I have realized that there's a voice that's in me, and hopefully in a lot of you, that's willing to step up and stand out and say something and do something about this. And I really do feel like there is a shift. I've talked to a lot of people who said, there's something different this way. There's something different when I look across, the social media platforms and like I said, the organizations, the communities, the churches, and you've got churches, huge white churches, white major or majority white congregations, and their pastors are saying Black lives matter, and they're willing to step up and say, and we've got to do something about it. And so I'm ready to be on the right side of history for this. So that's it.
Wow, Mimi, we're just sitting here all with jaws dropped and just applauding. That's what happens when you listen and you research objectively. And, so often I think people are reading things and searching out things that progress their already thoughts, that are just reinforcing what they already think, as opposed to taking a step back and just listening and reading with a clear mind, just seeking to try to understand. And it's very clear that that's the way that you've done this research, just sitting on the outside and looking and just trying to understand without any sort of agenda, without any sort of, preconceived thoughts. And it's just, I'm just going to just read to understand. And man, I appreciate that. They're spot on. Every single thing you talked about was so much. Like, we could delve so deep into any of those topics. They just go deeper and deeper, and it's more and more and more. But man, I just so appreciate your perspective with all that, and just clearing everything away and just getting down to the meat of it. And like I said, just really seeking to try to understand why these things are happening and why things look the way that they look today. Because a lot of times what we see as a current outcome today, we're not necessarily looking at all the things that led up to that. We're just, judging what we see today. And there's so many factors that go into our current status quo that we have to, backtrack and go and say, well, why is that? Why are there not as many Black fathers in the home? Or, why are incarceration rates so high? Or, why is the home ownership rate so low among people that are Black and brown? And there's explanations for it. There's a lot of things. If we just take a step back and really listen and do some objective research, we can find some of those answers. And man, that was awesome. Yeah. Okay. So, Gary, I think you are up next.
No, I believe it's Kristen. I think Kristen's next.
Gary, I'm going to defer to you this time.
Oh my God, everybody just loves to throw me in the fire. All right, well, that was great, Mimi. So Rick wanted kind of the senior citizens perspective. So shout out to my SCs out there. So I've lived for quite a while, and some of that time period of the civil rights movement and those things. I grew up in that generation. I mean, the 60s were a decade of marches and movements and protests. And, you're in the midst of the Cold War with democracy versus communism. And then all of a sudden in the 60s, all this social upheaval begins to transpire. And it was a very unsettling time in that period of history. And I'll just give you a personal point of view. My very first memory of television, and I was probably 5, maybe 6 at the time. And of course, I'm sure I watched cartoons and all those various different things, but my first memory of a television program was the assassination of JFK. And I remember I'm sitting there on the floor playing with, I don't know, Little Green Army Men or Lincoln Logs or something. And I was raised by my mother with the help of my grandmother, and they were just sitting on the couch and they were just weeping inconsolably. And it was there was just such a frantic feeling of what's going to happen. Who's in charge? Was this Russia? Was this somebody else? Was this the mob? I mean, all these questions came up over time. And the assassination of JFK was kind of our 9/11, because for the first time in history, all the major networks, all the television networks, radio networks were 24/7 covering this event, because it was just it was inconceivable that this could happen, that a president could be assassinated. It's interesting that just prior to that, and I'm not saying these two are tied together, but just a few weeks prior to his assassination, JFK had announced that his administration was going to make civil rights a major part of his administration. So I'm not saying those two are related, because JFK made a lot of enemies from Russia on down. So that was kind of like the first jolt of the 60s. And of course, JFK had been very involved in civil rights, but he was also towing that line of trying to keep his political base in order and still advance civil rights in a way that it could be received by the nation, which is really stupid, but I mean, that's what you have to do in that sort of situation. But it was the civil rights movement that launched the student movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement. I mean, it was just a decade of movements and civil unrest. So it was an unsettling time for most of the people during the 60s, because nobody knew what was going to happen. I mean, you had Martin Luther King, who actually started back in the 50s and was kind of thrust at center stage in Washington with the March to Washington, where 250,000 people show up and listen to the I Have a Dream speech. And then you had the other extreme, Malcolm X and Black Panther groups that were advocating more of a primarily self-defense, but also a militaristic kind of stance. Now, you know, Malcolm X later in his life changed his position from what it was when he was a younger man. So the civil rights movement helped to the protesters, the various different things that went on, helped, as it's doing today, focus the nation's attention on blacks having a second-class citizenship. And so a lot of good laws came out of that. You know, shortly after JFK was assassinated, one of the things that he was working on was the Civil Rights Act. LBJ passed that in '64, which was supposed to stop discrimination in the workplace due to race, color, religion, sex, etc. And then you had the Voting Rights Acts. And the bizarre thing about it is this is 100 years after the Civil War that we're having to pass laws to enforce the very thing that Abraham Lincoln wrote in, you know, got past the Emancipation Proclamation. And of course, you know, as Mimi put it earlier, you know, you can't tell somebody to pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they don't have a pair of boots. And that's what we did, you know, back after the Civil War. It's like, okay, you're free. Free for what? I mean, you have no land, you have no place to go. We are just beginning to reap a lot of the fruit of the seeds that have been sown for hundreds of years. And we've got to get it right this time. As the 60s went on, one of the, and I want to draw these other two things together too, there was a great student movement, which was kind of the next push after the civil rights. Student activists were becoming more frustrated by the Vietnam War, by poverty, by racial inequality, and they started becoming a little bit more extreme. It drew a lot more attention to all of these various different issues. And the one thing that I really want all of us to remember in this is that this is a long-term fight. Martin Luther King started in the mid-50s and would have continued on, and you know, as long as he could have if he had not been assassinated. These things take time. It shouldn't take this much time, but we cannot let it go away this time, because the things that came out of the 60s were good. There were good laws that were passed. It led to further laws and legislation and changes in business practice and various different things that have been beneficial. But that's basically a bandage on a cancer, and a cancer needs surgery, and what this needs is surgery in the heart of society. And there's one thing that, well, there are a few things. One thing, white people and pastors cannot let this issue be pushed to the back burner. And when Martin Luther King, the March at Washington, I Have a Dream speech, Rick asked Dion, where do you think you feel that we are on the alphabet? I think that most African Americans, the day after the I Have a Dream speech, felt like they had turned the corner and felt like they were at, maybe even X, maybe not that close, but they had hope. They felt that they were finally being heard. 250,000 people, show up at Washington. And yet what happened is that the Vietnam War began to escalate shortly thereafter. And so the billions of dollars that could have been spent in furthering and advancing the elimination of poverty, or the things in the civil rights movement, things that both JFK and LBJ supposedly supported, billions of dollars got diverted to a war that nobody wanted. And so those things were tied together. And then as I come back to the student movement.
I'm back on. Okay.
I would say give us a call tomorrow.
Am I interrupting somebody? Okay. So anyway, the Vietnam War diverted a lot of attention to the civil rights movement and the gains. In fact, Martin Luther King, in one of his last sermons, or last interviews actually, the interviewer asked him, he said, in Washington, you said, I have a dream. How do you feel that dream has become? And he said, in a lot of ways, it's turned into a nightmare, because the hope that they had on that day in Washington and the reality of how everything played out, because all the attention got diverted to a war and all the other different issues, it was just like one more broken promise again, which the United States is so well known to do. I mean, just look at the Native American community. One broken promise after another, one broken treaty after another. So I will say that America has a short attention span, and the media has an even shorter attention span. And this is going to try to get pushed to the back burner at some point, because we're going to see a spike in COVID-19. COVID-19 may take center stage. We've got a dirty, nasty election here coming up, and I hate it, because I've seen how the political process is just kind of slowly slidden down into the sewer. And, I hate to have to go through that again, but this is going to try to be pushed to the back burner by people that want it to go away. And it is incumbent upon us, upon the white community especially, and the pastors and predominantly white churches. We cannot let this issue get pushed to the back burner. We can't let this be a black issue. This is a humanity issue. It's not a racial issue. It's a human issue. And even people who aren't Christians understand and realize this. And anybody who has any kind of sense of morality coming out of the 60s, I felt like we'd kind of made it past the mountain. And here we are. We're going around the mountain again. I don't want my grandkids or my great-grandkids to have to go around the mountain. We got to get it right this time. So like I said, America has a really short attention span. There's going to be other things that try to push their way to the front, because people don't like to hear about one subject for a very long period of time. And it's incumbent on the white community especially that we don't let it go away this time. We can't. This is not a black issue. This is a humanity issue. Another thing, I will tell you, I was a little bit more of an activist back in the day, and involved with the pro-life movement, and trying to do racial reconciliation and breaking down the barriers between religious groups and churches, and doing the March for Jesus and the prayer walking. And I was fortunate enough to have, she was a black female pastor in the community when I was doing the March for Jesus and trying to put that together. Of Exciting Warren Memorial Church, right? I think that's correct. And just a beautiful heart, beautiful soul. But she was one of those ladies that when she put her mind to something, it's going to happen, you know, and you better just get on board with it. And she opened the door for me and to be able to speak to some of the black pastors there in Ardmore to get them on board and get them involved in the March for Jesus. But I came out of that period of time, and there were a lot of conversations that I would have with Jackie, and she had an assistant. I can't remember her name, but many times they would say things, and they were trying to, without coming out and saying things directly, they were trying to give me an idea into the mindset of the black community there in Ardmore. But I think it's, to a certain degree, true throughout, is that the black community no longer trusts the government, no longer trusts the white people, no longer trusts the system because they've been disappointed so many times. And so I think that is the area that we as the church, we can't back off of this issue. We have to educate ourselves about these issues. We have to understand, we have to continue these types of dialogues. And there has to be, there's always going to need to be laws and statutes that come along and changes in the structure of society to make it a more even playing field. But, you know, it's like, honestly, one of my favorite quotes to Martin Luther King says, "It may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me." And I think that's pretty important. And that is true. I mean, you know, that is, laws have to be made, they have to be passed, but they also have to be upheld. And that hasn't gone on so many times in the past. What God wants to do is he wants to deal with the internal, not the external. Yes, we're going to need laws. We're going to need oversight. Oversight of the police force. All these various different things need to be a conversation. But what God wants to do is to change our heart in a way that it hasn't been touched before. And in this area of racial reconciliation, you know, I don't know what much further to say other than that. It's just that God is wanting to come into this society with a scalpel and take the root of this out of our heart. And it's got to come from both sides. It's got to come not only from the white community being able to understand and see and deal with the issues and deal with the guilt you have from that, even though you didn't personally do it, you still have to deal with, you know, your great-great-grandfather's sins. And then the black community is also going to have to come to a point to where they can actually let go and forgive. And that's going to be tough, you know, tough on both sides. It's going to be tough. It's going to be something that only God can do. And we are some of the leaven that should be in the mix, the leaven that changes the hearts of people, one by one and in large numbers, until this deal is done. Because, you know, I don't want to see this get passed down to my future generations. You know, I want it done. I want it over with. I'm out.
Yeah, that's awesome, Gary. I think it's hopeful too when you start talking about the student movement and this youngest generation that's out here and being so strong and so vocal and so powerful right now. That's what's hopeful for me. You know, we've been talking over the last several months about millennials, and even now I think that the current generation are exennials, maybe, I think is what they're calling them. But man, these kids don't back down. And, you know, it's just like Rick is saying, so many of these issues are going to be solved by this generation. They're not going to, I don't think they're going to let us let it go. You know, I think that they're going to tackle poverty. I think they're going to tackle, you know, race issues and all of these things that we have tiptoed around and buried and just kind of allowed to maintain our status quo. I just don't think that's acceptable for them anymore. So
Well,
you talk about the
and
student movement. That's one of the things that's really, you know, hopeful for me is seeing these young kids out here.
Right.
Just, I mean, they're just not going to take no for an answer.
And that was the attitude back then as well. I mean, the student movement was strong. And sometimes it got violent. You had the Kent State shootings where the National Guard came in and protesters were rioting, and they shot and killed several students and injured several more. So, and one thing I don't want to see is, you know, military intervention in situations like this. It's not good. It's never been good. They didn't want to let it go away, but then the Vietnam War became such a focus that it took their focus off the civil rights. Not that they had abandoned it, but it's just a greater issue came along. And I think, you know, we cannot let this one get away from us. We can't let it slip away from our grasp and not freaking deal with it this time, you know, and that it's going to take time. This is not something that's going to be solved hundreds of years to get us here. It's going to take some time to get out of it, but we just have to get the focus for the long haul of doing this. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I agree. It's the youth that is going to pick this up hard and carry it.
No, I the one thing that I would echo that Gary said is it is there's already and I think I talked to Isaac about this a little bit earlier today. There is already a little bit of fatigue. You can tell people are a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that it's the protests and all the different conversations that are taking place are kind of keeping them from their day-to-day affairs and things that they would rather get back to. So I think Gary makes an outstanding point that there will be, and I think the longer this thing goes, the more you'll see that pushback from people who just, well, we've got it fixed enough. I think there'll be a complacency that will kind of get moving across this nation and just, hey, I want to get back to the things that I do every day instead of dealing with this. So I think you're spot on right there, Gary. I think that's happening already, and I think it's only going to get stronger in the next few weeks into months.
Yeah. And one more thing, I think it's important too that we continue to say that and really believe that this is not just a Black issue. It's not just a black and white issue. It's just not a Latino issue. This is a human issue, and it should make everybody fired up to try to overcome and fix it. And, you know, for years, it's just been, you know, a Black thing, a Black issue, a problem with Black people or whatever. And I'm so encouraged to see people stopping that terminology and stop labeling it that way, because it's not just a Black issue, you know? And I think that's really the only way that we're going to get past it is if we shift away from that. And we accept that this is not just a Black issue. It's a human rights issue. It's a human beings issue. And just like Gary said, the church has got to be at the forefront of this, and we have to lead the way. Yeah, that's awesome. Who we got next? Angelica. It's you, sister.
I think it was Kristen.
Yeah, I think Kristen was next.
Yeah, she can't
Kristen-
get past.
Chris-
She only gets one pass.
Kristen was supposed to go before me. I got thrown under the bus.
It's Angelica.
All right. We got a kid in the background watching the little video, so they'll be hearing that. Hopefully, no screaming. But yeah, I'm an emotional person, so ours is going to be a lot less. Sorry, we're on our phone. A lot less. Well, we didn't make a spreadsheet for it. That's really my point. We didn't make a spreadsheet like Mimi did, so Also, we don't have the experience and gray hairs to match, it like my father, so well explained. I just have the experience of what we do and how we live, and the things as a mother, as a Black father, of a multiracial daughter and another kid soon. Just the things that we are intentional about, because I don't think it's very common in other households. It wasn't in mine to an extent, because we grew up half white, half Hispanic, but majority of our growing was a lot more on the American side of things and less on the Hispanic culture side of things. But my parents did a good job of showing the importance of both. So I think as parents, mainly, we make conscious decisions. Okay, here's my thoughts. The way change will continue to echo is when it is started in the house and continues outside of the home. I think it is going to be a vital thing that our generation chooses to make a conscious decision as to what they're feeding their children, what they're mentally preparing them for. And I don't mean this as Black Americans. I mean it as any other ethnicity or culture. I think it's very important that people start to talk about, okay, so I had a friend who was like, yeah, I can repost this, but what good does that do? What do I do after that, basically? And I said, you're right, there is so much more that you can do. One is teach your children about different cultures. That's a huge thing. Just letting them know that there are so many cultures, so many different people that look different, that talk different, that have different, backgrounds and grow up differently, and they have different traditions, and the beauty in that. Secondly, show the importance of defending somebody who can't defend themselves. Because when we start to turn our privilege in a defensive stance as opposed to an offensive, instead of getting offended that I have all this privilege and I seem to be doing okay, it's no, where can I take this and help defend my brothers and sisters who don't have that opportunity to, who don't feel at liberty to speak up. And that goes not only for people who don't look like us, but people who are not necessarily on the same mental capacity either. I think the disabled community as well needs that, because I want my children to know that you defend people no matter where they are, what they look like, or anything. And so we make those conscious decisions to have books in our household, pictures on our walls that represent African American women that are part of Jania's culture, and the importance of seeing women that look powerful and strong and beautiful and all the things that we want to teach her to be. I think it's very important that we start that in our household, because I can't leave it to the world to tell them right from wrong. It's my job as a parent, and that's the same with bringing in books that look like her, which is very hard because there is not a lot of books out there. And I'm telling you this because I only had to walk through it with my daughter. I didn't have to do that. I mean, there's not a lot of Hispanic books out there either, but the characters are so important. The narrative needs to be about children of color who are working through this world, and about them, and not about it has to be painting a picture of positive as opposed to all the negative that they're going to already get. It has to say, no, this is what it should look like. And so anyways, we make a conscious decision to look for books that look like our children, or look for dolls that look like our daughter, or do things where she's not feeling like there's such a light tone to everything, and just kind of tell her hair is beautiful, and always encourage her to, like, oh, I love your curls. Those are things that children need to hear, because when you hear all the negative connotations of what curly hair is, that sometimes it is a little messy and sometimes it can get a little out of hand. But whenever there's negative things like mop and stuff like that, that's just wrong. Who wants that on? Who wants this? I don't want somebody to be like, oh, that mop on your head. That's so disrespectful. It's things like that are minor things that really hurt children and really hurt the perspective that you have on yourself and think about your beauty, your natural beauty. And so we do things like that to encourage her. We always try to wear her hair curly. I don't want her to try to straighten it yet, and just embrace the things that the beauty that God's always given her. Like, oh man, your skin's so pretty and so soft like a baby. We just try to keep investing those things into her so that she knows that I'm beautiful, I am perfect, my family loves me, that kind of stuff. Because it starts at this age. This is where she starts hearing things like messy or bad or, dirty. That's not the type of person that I want her to become. I want her to be encouraged in the things that God already gave her. And so I think it's so important for us. And then in the multicultural community, I'll say that because there's more to it than just the Black. I don't consider myself the Black community by any means, but I have married into that. And so I take that as an honor that I get the opportunity to be invested into.
Still invited to the barbecue.
Yeah, I got that invite. But I think it's super important because, again, I will agree with Mimi. For a while, yeah, I was dating or married somebody that was Black, but I didn't feel like that gave me a pass at all to speak on the multitude of experiences that Malcolm has had growing up. And he was even raised by a doctor, white family, and he still had to deal with a ton of racism growing up in a small community in Wisconsin, where him and one of his other brothers were the only visibly known African-American people in their community. And so for a while, I agree, I didn't feel like an ally. I felt like an outsider. And that's part of kind of how I felt growing up too, because I wasn't white and I wasn't all white and I wasn't all Mexican. I was just kind of in between it. Sorry guys, meltdown. Somebody shut that kid up. I'm just kidding. Sorry. But it's just like growing up with not feeling either side of things. It's kind of like I'm in this limbo and I don't feel the opportunity to speak about anything because I don't know a whole lot based on experience. I just know mine. And I'm not an African-American male, but I agree with Mimi when she talks about becoming an ally. I think the narrative here now on this this recent take on things has been that we need, hold on, the Black community, we're saying this now. We need you. You can't be separate now. We have to, do you see how inhumane this is? This isn't about just us. This is about the quality of life for all of us. And we need your support because this is going to affect you as well. And on top of that, how diverse our families are becoming. Now, a lot of white Americans are learning, oh, wait, these are my children that are going to have to deal. These are my grandchildren that are going to have to deal with this. This is in my family. It's here. It's on my front door now. I have to be willing to defend them because they won't have the opportunity to defend themselves. Anyway, so I think it's all going to take a lot of effort, yes, but when that momentum dies down in the social side of things, I think where the torch is going to need to be taken and continued is definitely going to be in the household, because racism is a learned thing. Hate is a learned thing. We don't come out feeling that way. All we see at a point is just love and how affectionate and affecting it is. And then when we start to see the imperfections of the people before us, and then we take that on. And so I think with this generation who are already, this group of young people who are already leading the inclusion of everything, of people who want, who are walking a different life than what they were born in. I think because of that, it has softened our generation to say, oh, wait, if we can stand in alliance with the Pride group of people, then we better be standing in a line with Black people who have no opportunity to change anything of what they are. They don't have any choice out of this. They're not a police officer who gets to take off his uniform. They have to live it every day. And the stress of that and the sleeplessness and the callousing that has to come with that type of a lifestyle, boy, these few weeks have been really tough on me. Imagine what it's like living that 100% of the time. It's just something that I think we tend to take for granted. That I'm a friend asked, how is everything with you and Malcolm? I was thinking about you guys as I was reading a bunch of stuff online and just thinking how this is affecting you guys and how this is, are you guys doing anything changing? He's like, I don't know how to ask that question. Are you guys changing anything with all this hecticness that's going on? And I was like, honestly, man, we already live our lives differently than you do, because you're white. And I was like, I say this in a non-offensive way, like offending way, like we already do this stuff. Like we already don't drive. If it's at night, he can drive, but if it's in the daytime and we are going to be rolling down with the windows or something, I mean, I tend to drive. I just feel safer that way because it's not him in the passenger or in the driver's seat. There's other things like he was talking about, I think I want to, get a conceal and carry. Would you want to take your license with me? But that's a very serious question that we have to have and really think about, because yes, I want him to be protected wherever he's at, but if his right as a citizen is taken as a threat because of him, am I helping or hindering are we doing any good for him? Because against an officer, if you pull that out, I mean, that's not, you can't say it was in defense. It's not. And that in their eyes, it is not in defense, it was an attack. And so these are really serious questions that we have to have in general. And that I don't think that, my white friend was asking, are we doing anything different? And I honestly was like, dude, we already have the steps. He doesn't go running unless he tells me what direction he's going, where he's going, how long he's going for. It gives me the details so that I know if anything's outside of that, he's either hurt because he's getting old and his bones are cracking, or he's getting lazier. No, I'm just kidding. But it's just because, I mean, you've gotten slower. You've gotten slower over the years, but it's for his safety. I don't know if something's happened to him or if somebody's done something to him. It's really important to us because we communicate with each other often where we are, so that way we know where the last place to look is. And I don't think other people have to necessarily do that, or don't consciously do that.
And that's just based off of experiences. So like everyone here, you have someone to reach out to, and in my experience, when there's two Black kids in the town and one of them's your brother, who necessarily are you going to reach out to when you get called like a nigger at school, or all these terms that when you're young, you have no idea. Like it hits you and it hurts, but I mean, there's only so many people you can pour out to that have witnessed or have felt those same experiences. And when she was talking, I was getting like a random vision of a rainbow, and I mean, that's just huge. Multicultural, like any type of diversity like that, it's a beautiful thing. And if you take out one color out of a rainbow, it's not going to be a rainbow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's done. So I feel like it's just really important to know what anyone else's experience is. And that goes beyond Black and white. I mean, that's love God, love people. You just really want to listen. I mean, if someone's hurting in the church,
yeah,
you got to listen. I mean, that goes back to what Dion was saying. All you got to do is listen. And lucky for this group, I mean, we have each other and we have people to reach out to. So you're not casted on that island like some kids are when they're little. And there's experiences, and I've had a lot of bad experiences, and I could tell you a bunch, but I mean, it wasn't the fact that it hurts me today. It hurts me knowing that my daughter's gonna maybe have to go through the same thing, and it's messed up because I have the answer for it. I mean, and it's just crazy. And like I said, the good thing about this group is you guys have so much stuff, and you have so many resources and so many people that have been through that time period. In the 50s, you have Black people in this group you can reach out to. You have women of color it's heavy. And in a time like this, I mean, it's a heavy topic. I mean, just like sex is a heavy topic, and race, and I mean, it hurts to talk about it, but unfortunately it's real, and we have people that can piggyback off of each other when some experiences like this happen. I mean, you got to have backup. I mean, lucky for when I was in high school, like my brother Garrett was backup, you know, so lucky. I mean, we all have each other and we all have backup. So, I mean, that's pretty much
Yeah.
what I was getting at. But I mean, the bottom line, I think, I mean, there's books anyone can read.
I hope any one of y'all can read.
Anyone can read
Any
a book.
one of y'all can read a book.
But it just comes down to listening.
Yeah.
I mean, if you listen to anyone's story, black, white, I mean, if it hurts their heart, typically you should listen, and you should have a response, not of your own, but of God's. I mean, just listen to God and listen to someone's story, because the bottom line is, at times like these, I mean, everyone's going to need an ear to pour into. I mean, I don't care what color you are. I mean, but
Especially when you discover your privilege.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. So when you discover how much privilege you do have, it is tough, because it's almost like a point of shame. You're like, oh my gosh, I had no clue. And I don't want there to be that on people, but I think it's really important that when we as people who are living in it, have people who want to reach out and say, I don't understand any of this. I'm trying to, and we've had family members who have even said and done things that are, you know, I had a family member who said, you know, White Lives Matter, posted that. And I was like, riled up, and I just had to calmly post on there and remind them, hey, you have family members in your family currently who are dealing with a whole lot. And for you to say something like this doesn't help them feel included. It helps them feel excluded and not loved and not cared for in a time where they're losing sleep
and
over thinking about if they're coming home at night to their family.
And this isn't when I'm just resorting to Facebook, because that's always on my feed. Just I mean,
gotta
this is
delete
stuff, but you got it. This isn't a battle.
Yeah.
It's not, and it's just one person's hurting. That's all the hashtag. I mean, Black Lives Matter. I mean, it's a movement because Black people are hurting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got to think if next week, if something happened with white people and something carried through and it hurt them, and they posted White Lives Matter, I'm gonna post it because someone's hurting. Like, that's
Yeah. Standing in alliance with those who are hurting, I think. And I think that's how, if we decide to communicate with people, I obviously say, don't do it over Facebook, because I don't think that helps change people's lives or anything like that. There's no new revelation over Facebook. But I think it does give you the opportunity about reaching out of love, because that's how I had to deal with a lot of my family members is, hey, I know you're saying this, and I know that you're not saying it out of hate. But when you do say this, all we see or all we hear is that we don't matter to you, that JJ doesn't matter to you. And I know that you love her, but when you're saying this is what that is saying. This is how this has come about. And so kind of reaching out to them out of love and being very like humble about this. Like, I'm not going to go off on this person because what they don't know the hurt that they're saying and that kind of stuff. So anyways, I just think when it comes to time where people want to argue or discuss, if they're wanting to argue, that's one thing. Pass it off. They're stuck in their ways until they experience something, just like how you experience God. You can reason it away all you want, but until you experience him, there's no way you can, that without a shadow of a doubt, can say God does not exist. Anyways, I think I'm over my time because Malcolm keeps hinting towards me, but we all knew that was going to happen. So I think
Mimi.
Yeah, Mimi, did you want to say something about kids?
Yeah, sorry. And then you guys can summarize what she was saying too and touch base. But whenever you were talking about, it starts in the home, racism is taught in the home. So you have to teach them. I feel like it's very important that we understand that anti-racism is taught in the home. Like, it's not just like goes both ways. That one is like, you know, there's people who can put these prejudice and these opinions on their kids, but we have to go above and beyond. And one of the things that I had texted with Asha when this first, you know, a couple of weeks ago, is that I said, it's hard because we are very diverse in our, you know, with our family. And then my kids, each of them, actually their best friends are Black. And so it doesn't really come up in they don't look at them differently. And I know that, but I have to like kind of bring that to their attention now and say, look, this is, you know, people like Gideon, you know, he is Black. And so because of that, people can treat him differently. Now, here's what you have to do to step in and defend it. And did you hear that this conversation that happened? This is how you need to respond to that. And so it's kind of an awkward, it's an awkward conversation, but it's not even kind of as tough of a conversation as Black families are having with their own Black kids. So I take that very, like, I understand that, but it is a hard conversation to say, you know, hey, you need to see the difference now, because there is a difference, and here's what we have to do to become their defender, to step in there and to be their ally and to do that. So I think both ways, we've got to be very proactive in how we're teaching our kids. And like you said, what sometimes it gets pushed away is like, we don't talk necessarily about race because we're very diverse. We don't, you know, want you to see it. But I posted something the other day, you know, God was not colorblind. Look around, look at the beautiful things he created in the ocean and the flowers and the sunsets. Like if he wanted us all to be the same color, he would have made us all the same color, and he didn't. So we can't look at us as like one single hue, and we have to teach our kids, like, we are all different and unique, and yet, you know, and here's what you do to be an anti-racist, to step up, to step out, to say something. So I just wanted to add that with your teaching the things in the home, which is super key.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have to, just like you said, not just teach that we love everybody, but you have to, I mean, we have to train our kids and teach our kids to be anti-racist, to be vocally anti-racist, to call it out when we see it, to stand up for people, you know, to call a thing. And it's uncomfortable, and really they need to see you do it. You know, our kids need to see our parents step up and say things and talk about what's not going to be allowed and what we're going to do in this house and what we're not going to, and even outside this house, and how to address things when we're out in public and we see things that are not right, and how we address that and how we tackle it and take it on. That's spot on. And you know, kids are just so awesome. And Angelica was talking about, you know, starting all of this with the kids in the home, and you know, it's so incredibly important. And we have those conversations with our kids too. And, you know, they're in situations where they're most of the time the only kids in the room that look like them in their activities, in their classrooms. Amira is going to be in 7th grade and has never had another Black girl in class, not ever. So she has tons of challenges with her hair, and people wanting to touch her and rub her and feel her hair and ask a million questions, and feeling like she even said something before we left today about how her friends act like she's Oprah because they want to ask her all the questions about Black people, because she has to kind of be the spokesperson for all Black people in all of her groups. And, you know, I'm going to try to move on, but I was having a conversation with some other real estate agents this week, and it was a diverse panel kind of like this, and they were talking about, well, what can we do? What books do we need to read? What movies do we need to watch? And she and I, after we got off the call, she was like, man, you know, I always feel kind of bad when people ask that. She said, because I can't say that I have a whole library of, you know, civil rights books and things like that, and I can't just throw them out there because it's just been our life. You know, this is just our life. I don't need to read a book to tell me about the experiences of my life and my parents and my kids. And so everybody's asking for recommendations and suggestions on, you know, what they should be reading and what they should be watching. But in a lot of ways, it's time for other people to do research and go and find it, because I mean, that's very true. You know, we don't watch a lot of civil rights movies, for one, because it's hard to watch, but two, because it's life. And this is not new information. It's just been everyday life. So I'm encouraged seeing people make it part of their everyday speeches, their everyday lives, their conscious decisions and thoughts, and conversations with their kids and things like that. So that definitely encourages me.
Mhm. I will say one thing, it's not anything profound or anything like that, but you can't help but sit here and be so appreciative of both you guys, but especially Malcolm's heart. He's dealt with a lot, but yet he still finds enough mercy and enough grace to say that it doesn't matter who you are. If you're hurting, I want to help.
Yeah.
And it's funny. The people who get wounded the most still have the biggest hearts. If I didn't get anything else from tonight, Malcolm, I sure love you and appreciate you. Goodness, man alive.
Yeah.
But
I know we just keep going.
But I know that that we've heard a lot, but I got to say that I've been waiting kind of to hear from Isaac, because we kind of talked a little bit this afternoon, and I think some of the things that he has to share are perspectives that we haven't quite looked at yet. So Isaac, it's yours.
All right. Gary, sorry about earlier, man. I've been having internet problems, and literally I was on the phone with my IT guy when I got back in, trying to get reconnected. So sorry about that. I'm glad it's working now. Hopefully it stays. So I don't have a lot of lived experiences. This kind of topic is hard for me to really dive into from that angle. I don't think I really can. I'm about as stereotypical white as they get. I grew up on the Grateful Dead, Tom Petty. I love EDM music. Like I love it. You know, when I dance, it's hideous. Some people out here can testify to that. I have no moves. And like Rick, I also love Notting Hill. Yes. But I have come to realize that I have a voice, as a very white privileged man. My voice is very important in a time like this. And I didn't always think that way. I've spent many years listening to Black friends. I've been following Black leaders, Native American leaders, stuff that's just rocked me for years. But I do want to thank you guys for allowing me to speak. Although I don't have these lived experiences, I'm not going to come from that angle. I've been really thinking about what to get into today, and it seems like I'm last year, so I'm guessing that means there's no time frame. Maybe, I don't know. I'll try to cut through it shortly, okay? I don't want to keep everybody all night. I know many are probably hungry. So I've been thinking about, like, you know, Rick asked a question, what is God doing you in this moment? And I come from two different perspectives on that. From one angle, I think, man, it seems so simple in so many ways, especially as a follower in Christ. I mean, if I'm going to walk down the sidewalk and I'm going to see a man of any color, a woman of any color on the sidewalk, and I pass them and they're screaming out, I can't breathe, I want my mom, I'm hurting. As a human, most humans will probably try to help. I would hope, right? To me, as a believer, it's even more deeply in our faith. It is to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus tells us, what you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. And as a follower of Christ, we help all people, the immigrants, the poor, those of all nations. So from one angle, I look at this and I go, well, this is what we're supposed to do as a follower of Christ. This is a human issue. We talked about it a lot tonight. This is a human issue. But then I start thinking about, and that I believe is above everything else, the things we should be doing, right? That Great Commission. I mean, and to just love one another, to treat us as humans. But I began to think about the ecclesia, and Rick's been talking about this for a while. And this is something that honestly is a pretty new concept, this legislative assembly, right, that he's been diving into. And talking about expanding into our communities, our cities, identifying strongholds, dark principalities, going after those things, and begin to bind those things. And under the authority of King Jesus. This is our job as the church. And these are things that honestly are some things I'm grappling with right now. I'm trying to understand. But I think in order to understand certain strongholds, you need to get into root systems. You need to understand where these things came from. As I was going in through college and pastoral counseling and training and that, at one point I thought I was going to do church ministry. I got into church ministry and realized I'm not going to do church ministry. But in my counseling and that type of training, and I have friends that are counselors now that are psychologists, and they'll tell you, and it's everybody knows this, that when you get into people's problems, their root issues, heart issues, their whatever struggle they're dealing with, you can go deep into their childhood, into things that happen at a young age. And I'm looking at the issue of race, and I'm looking at our country, and I can't speak on lived experiences, but I can look at it from a white perspective and look at my history. And I kind of want to dive into that. And Mimi already went through the recent history, so I'm really glad she did that because I wasn't planning on talking about that. But over the last several weeks, what's been crazy to me is how many people have asked me or talked to me, people in my office, people just friends of mine, just a conversation. Hey man, do you know about, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, 1922? Did you ever hear about what happened there, man? I've lived in Oklahoma my whole life, and I'm just learning about that. Hey man, I don't know much about the Jim Crow. I remember talking about Jim Crow laws when I was younger. What are the Jim Crow laws, man? I don't quite remember all that. And this is in my white circle, okay? I work with primarily white people. My family is white. I have been talking to some of my black friends, and they're telling me right now that they feel like they are a history professor talking about Jim Crow laws to their coworkers and trying to teach people about that. I had a friend the other day tell me, man, why are they tearing down the Christopher Columbus statue? That makes no sense. Like, this is a hero in our white history books, right? He's portrayed as a hero. So if you guys don't mind, I do want to dive into a little bit of the genesis of our country. I like to kind of think when I go through this stuff in timeline, so I'll try to keep it quick. I'm going to circle back into the church, so bear with me. But I do want to start right from the beginning. America's original sin was racism, and racism manifested from stolen land and slave labor. We all know 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, landed at Plymouth. And in my history books and what I was taught is that he was welcomed by the Native Americans with a carved turkey and a basket full of bread and green bean casserole, because that is the best Thanksgiving dish there is. Can I get amen? Anybody? But that's what I was taught, right? That this was, yeah, I should say no. I'm sorry, I love it. But the truth is, that is not accurate. From day one, when the English settlers came over, and I'm going to just ask for forgiveness in advance. Some of this stuff's really heavy, but I don't want to ignore our roots, okay? And that's where I'm trying to get at here. Columbus was commissioned by the Queen of England to expand their territory, to take control of new lands, find new resources, bring wealth back to England, right? But his men and he sex trafficked Native American women, young girls, murdered their babies. They would cut off their hands if they didn't bring them enough gold. And this is the foundation, the very beginning of how our country began. And I heard TD Jakes talking about 4th of July, and I thought that was fascinating, how he thinks that 4th of July, he can't celebrate 4th of July because he wasn't free when we became a country. You got to think about how Native American people think about Thanksgiving. You think that's the day they get excited about? The day that represents the time when white men came and took their land? And they're going to be thankful? That's a hard day for Native Americans. That's a hard, hard day to have that annual reminder, the day that they were displaced. And what the white man did, they came in from England, and through hundreds of years, they set up concentration camps similar to Nazi Germany. They began setting up territories. They took natives and placed them in depressed areas of our country, many of which are still there to this day. We all know about the Trail of Tears. 60,000 Native Americans were displaced and put in different parts of the country. I mean, go out to Wyoming, go out to North Dakota, Arizona, here in Oklahoma. There are lands throughout our country that we have placed these people, and these are not economically growing areas. You go into the mountains of Wyoming, there's a reason those are such poverty-stricken people, right? We literally, and I say we because this falls into my heritage, I have a lot of English roots. We literally came into this land and claimed it as our own. And to this day, those people remain, many of them, as a forgotten people. And that's the truth. And they live that. But I look at those sin issues, all right? So they came in and you got greed, you've got dominion and power over another human race for wealth, spread hate, murder, the worst things you could think of, okay? That established this. And so 380 plus years, if you start from 1492 and you get into the Trail of Tears, ended in 1877, that is 385 years of war with Native Americans, displacing them, banishing them parts of the country where the white men didn't want to occupy. And that's a real history that I wasn't taught. I've learned this through the years, reading books, understanding, becoming friends with Native Americans. So this is the beginning, right? Okay, so this is how our country is established. Then, and really not too far off from that same time period, in 15th century, European countries, mainly led by Portugal, began the transatlantic slave trade route by kidnapping Africans off the West Coast to enslave them to Europe. Actually, the European countries that started this. And really, if you go through any country history, I mean, if you go into Australia, you look at how they were established. It's ugly. They got a bad history too. You look at South Africa, one of the most racist areas of the world. America's not alone, but I do want to focus in here on America. But slave trading began out of the European countries. But in 1619, the ship called the White Lion, a ship carrying 20 African slaves, came ashore the British colony of Jamestown. And these slaves were seized from a Portugal ship, brought over 1619, 130 years after Columbus. Throughout the 17th century, European settlers began turning from poor European workers to now African slaves as cheaper and more plentiful labor sources. They were using cheap European workers, paying them nothing, and then they start they felt was working and began bringing African slaves over. In the 18th century, they say it's estimated that 6 to 7 million enslaved people were imported to the New World in that century alone. 6 to 7, that time frame, that's a lot of people. In 1793, the great Eli Whitney created the cotton gin, and prior to that, you've got most slaves working in tobacco and rice fields for a couple centuries. That's what they were doing, just labor work. Eli Whitney comes in, he creates a cotton gin in England's expected textile industry to boom. Cotton became an important crop, and this is what primarily slaves were doing for years. By 1860, there were over 4 million active slaves, which made up about 1/3 of the population of the South. 1/3 of the population of the South were slaves. Then Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm sure we're all very familiar with that, which abolished slavery. What I didn't know until recently is that wasn't official in Texas until 2 years later. Now they celebrate Freedom Day, or Juneteenth, which is going to be here in a few days, on June 19th in 1865. 1865, slavery was abolished. That's our great-great-grandparents, many great-great-great-grandparents. That's 4 generations back, 3 to 4 generations back, the slavery was abolished. And if you're thinking about it, if you're looking at those dates, 1619, the first slave ship comes in, to 1865 when it was technically abolished, that's 246 years of active legal slavery in America. That's a long, long history of slavery in America. That's only 155 years ago. Our country has spent more time in legalized slavery than not as a nation. Okay, so we have some heavy, deep-rooted histories as a country. Then, if that wasn't enough, the slaves are free now, but we don't want to hang out with them. We don't want to hang out with the Black community. So here comes the Jim Crow laws in 1870. And these were created to segregate, and they were upheld in 1893 through Plessy Ferguson. I'm sure I'm getting back to some of the old history stuff we used to learn. But that lasted until 1960, the Jim Crow laws of segregation. Some parts of the South and Alabama went on into the 70s. And it didn't stop until you saw Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights activist movement come in and march and take a stand. And you saw that fade away. And as Gary mentioned earlier, not far after that, Vietnam came in. It was a big distraction. Then I'm born in 81, and I'm born into this wonderful family, a nice, beautiful white bubble that I was raised up in. My memory of this stuff, I don't have much. I was raised by hippies. They truly taught us not to see color. I'm very, very blessed for that. But I mean, if I'm thinking back, I mean, we've got Martin Luther King, we got Vietnam happening, and then we got the 80s, which is just a confusing era. People didn't know how to dress, or the music was horrendous, in my opinion. You know, but I began to remember in my life the Rodney King incident in LA and the LA riots that happened. But it honestly seems so distant and unrelatable. And then you got 9/11, right? And then somewhere in there after that, like, you got Nickelback that somehow becomes famous. I don't know. I mean, you got some weird stuff going on. But then all of a sudden, we get cell phones that have video, and we're taking pictures. And all of a sudden, this becomes a reality. And my nice little bubble is like, whoa, what's happening? I mean, I do remember the LA riots. I remember some of that stuff happening. But I grew up in Noble, guys. I mean, I had a couple Black kids in my school. Okay, so all of a sudden I'm seeing this stuff firsthand, and I'm going, whoa, hold on. What is this? And I do understand, as you look over history, we got 400 years of deeply rooted sin, hundreds of years of viewing people of color as legal property. And I understand that can't be fixed in a matter of weeks. I understand this is a fight. Gary talked about it. We cannot stop. I don't want to ignore the progress. I want to hit on a couple quick progress things I've seen over the last couple weeks, just because it's encouraging. We have a long way to go, and I'm going to kind of turn this and try to land this with getting into some scripture, getting into the church. But before I do that, some of the progress I've seen is that police reform, as we know, is being put into motion in many cities. A week ago, you hear Minneapolis with the incident of George Floyd, right? They're now coming out and saying they're dismantling the police department and they're starting reform. This is great. Breonna's Law, named after Breonna Taylor, is being passed in many cities, preventing police from the no-knock warrants that being passed. This is wonderful. You're seeing now the NFL is okay now with kneeling. Great. NASCAR is banning the Confederate flag. Are you kidding me? That's big. They're taking a stand. Statues that have stood for years as a reminder of our nation's acceptance of our wicked past are being toppled. I'm seeing political leaders from both sides of the aisle that are praising the destruction of these symbols of hate. That's progress. We're seeing this time, Mimi talked about, a lot of talked about, it feels different. Things are happening. The empathy is real. But the thing that I think about, to get back to our history, think about this sin root, as I've been praying about this and thinking about it, God's kind of, and I don't want to over spiritualize this, guys, it's so easy to do it. But I began to see religious Israel. I began to see Israel, and I look at white America. And I'm not going to get too much into Israel's history. We know a lot of that. But they spent years establishing their land, building their religious systems that all people were to adopt within their nation, right? And then here we got this man, Jesus, who comes along and breaks down these systems that have been built up. His life is dedicated to the marginalized, the oppressed. He met them with empathy and compassion, no matter their nationality. T.D. Jakes, he started talking about, and Mimi hit it on it earlier, about the Great Samaritan, or the Good Samaritan, and that message is so powerful. That it was somebody from a different nationality. The priest passed them up, the Levi passed them up, and some different nationality came in, the Samaritan, and helped. But that's the message of Christ, right? And he says, and the Great Commission in Matthew 28 was his very last words to the disciples as he departed. And Rick talked about this a few weeks back. This just gets me so fired up, so I might just start preaching here. But his all authority has been given to him in heaven and earth. Now go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Okay, so this Jesus comes along, he's living this life, he comes, he dies on the cross, raised from the dead, and he gives this as his very last words after he breaks down these systems. And then what happens? You've got now Pentecost, which is pretty wild if you think about it. Pentecost was a room full of people from all different nations. This was not just the Holy Spirit pouring out on the Jews. Okay, you've got Israel, you've got the Jewish people, right? This is the nation. Jesus comes and he, in a sense, dismantles the old and he brings in the new. What's one of the first things that happens? Pentecost. After he ascends, Pentecost, full of people. And I'm not going to get all the different names. I'm going to butcher them anyways. But the Parthians, the Romans, the Elamites, the Mesopotamia, people, Judea, you have people from all different types of nations gathering together in one place. That's so important. The list goes on of all the countries. And at this moment, Rick talked about it last week, you've got a moment of convergence in time, right? Where now you've got these people been now filled with the Spirit and they're going out and look what they did. But what was crazy about that time is one of the biggest hurdles that they dealt with, and Paul had to talk about it quite often, was race. There was a lot of confusion after you have Israel is the old, right? Then you've got now this new group coming in, and all these Gentiles are going, okay, hold on. Do I have to convert to Judaism? Do I have to abandon my ethnic identity in order to be made right with God? And Paul says in Acts that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. He opens this thing up. And here the religious leaders were not having it. They were upset. They're going, this is my land. This is our promise. This is what we've been given. We've had this for years and years and years. And who are you coming in and trying to take it? This is our thing. This is our thing. And I look at white America, and I look at the church. I don't want to get into that at the moment, but I look at white America, and for so long, and I don't know if you guys saw the videos of the Karen, right, from California, the woman who went after the Asian girl that was exercising, and then the next day she got on some other guy who's an Asian guy. What she was saying in that video, and I've heard it over and over in my life, is this is our land, get out of here, you're not welcome. This is our land. There's this, what's ironic about that is we stole the land. We stole that land. But this is our land, get out of here. This is ours, this is our promise. This is ours. Who are you? Get out of here. And I see this with Israel as we're seeing this transition. And one of the first things that happens is this opening up to all nations, to all races. And there's power that happens with that. And this is the heart of the church. The church is global. The church is to be disciple of all nations, all ethnicities, neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for we are all one in Christ. Abraham's descendants, heirs according to the promise. That's Galatians 28:29. Paul says our citizenship is in heaven, in the kingdom of Christ. He said, my citizenship's not found in Rome, although he was Roman. It's in Christ the King, in his kingdom. And as the church, I'm starting to see some white pastors and religious leaders, the Southern Baptists, for crying out loud, are starting to take a stand. And we're starting to see some stuff move. But to me, it's the church of all nations that should be leading this charge. The old establishment is gone, and let's bring in the new. And I mentioned this to Rick, and I'll kind of close with this, that I look at our American history, and Mimi talked about it, Gary talked about it, and I look at our systems, right? And guys, I get overwhelmed. Mimi talked a little bit about banks and loans, and I work in land. I work in oil and gas. We do primarily right-of-way pipeline type work, and we also do electric work, but we deal with land, right? I don't know if I've ever dealt with a black landowner. I think everybody I've ever dealt with has been a white landowner. Land has been, from early on, broken out and given. The white people took control of the land early. And then, Mimi talked earlier with the banks, they weren't giving out loans to black people. They were establishing zoning requirements. They're getting into commercial zoning, housing zoning, and it was very white driven from back in the day. So the blacks have been just pushed to the side. And I look at the systems, the established systems, and I think about those sorts of things. I think about the old money, the oldest. Black people don't know what old money is. That's very much a white thing. We have old, deeply rooted systems. We have deeply rooted sin. And I get overwhelmed. And I want to kind of read this because I texted this to Rick last week, and it's something God was really speaking to me. And I know that God could just wipe all of it out, right? I mean, he could. But that's not how he operates. It is the church, the Great Commission to all nations, that we are his vehicle, we're his conduit. It's always been the church from the day Jesus ascended from earth, that is to do the work and to go forth. We are his life vein into our communities to elicit change and movement with his power. It is through us. We have to be willing to stand up as one and march forward as one with a unified vision to see change, and give him the ability to operate, and he'll do it. He needs something physical to flow through. He needs his body. And we need to get in and look at some of these deeply rooted issues and address them in the spiritual realm. I haven't done that type of thing in a while. Went after stuff like that. I've kind of been sidelined for a while and not really thought much about those types of things. So when Rick talks about this, I kind of, okay, but he's right. There are spiritual things working. There are foundational things working that we need to address. And we must not forget our past, but we must learn from it and overcome it and be the body and be the church. And yeah, I mean, I could go on. I know we're running late already, but I feel that although it is not, although we're seeing stuff with individuals and we're seeing people gather together and march, and we're seeing a huge uprising of the white community, we need to get into the trenches. And I'm not talking about just white people. I'm talking about the church. The body we need to be the leading voice into the trenches, moving into our communities to do this. There are some organizations out there already established. I think it's Stronger Together. The church that we go to here in Norman, Antioch Church, led by Clarence Hill. A lot of you guys have watched his videos. He leads that. There are things established in our areas that we can jump in and be a part of. But this group here, as this thing grows, I believe strongly that God is going to call us to go into our communities, to be that legislative authority, to move, to work out that Great Commission and to address these principalities, these strongholds, these things that have been heavy on our country for years. And so I kind of feel like I rambled. I don't have lived experience, but those are the things that God's been hitting me on. And Deanna, I can kind of give it back to you, but there's a lot to chew on there.
I've been excited to hear from Isaac since we talked today, because I think he touched on a few things that aren't part of discussions and aren't topic of discussions, and they absolutely have to be. You absolutely have to take a look back at the history of this country to understand why we are where we are. And that is something and I know it's uncomfortable. I know people don't like to hear that, some of the things that happen from the jump, but it's just like in a marriage. If you don't talk about the issues that you have at the beginning of your marriage, you're doomed to fail in that marriage. It's the same thing. It's the same type of principle. We have to be willing to discuss the things that have happened that have been bad. We talk about George Floyd and it's the issue of the day, and I get that and I understand that. But if we don't talk about the slavery issue that started this, if we don't talk about those things that happened 400 years ago, then we have lost the opportunity to really get reconciliation. You can't get reconciliation with any issue if you refuse to discuss the issue. And the issue didn't just start today. The issue didn't just start with Jim Crow even. It dates back. It's like Isaac said, these are deeply rooted things that have happened, and we can't brush it's like abuse of a child. Until once it happens, you can't undo it, and you have to go examine it. You have to go back and you have to address it properly for you to get any type of reconciliation and any type of healing. And the longer we keep from having those tough conversations, the longer we don't acknowledge the elephants in the room, the further we are from true healing, from getting to the place that we want to get to. And I absolutely agree 100% with Isaac. It has got to be God's church. It has got to be God's church that leads this thing. If we give this to someone else, then we've lost. If we give this to anything other than God, we have lost. And I can't tell you how deeply I feel that in my spirit. That's the way that it was always supposed to be. It's like Rick has said over the last few weeks, and like Chris has said, and some of these other guys, that have spoken have said, these things have not happened by accident. This crisis, this pandemic, those things have not happened by accident. They were leading up to the point that we're at right now. We are exactly where we're supposed to be. We have an opportunity to get something done, to get healing, to get movement, to get for something to be different. God brought it up again so it can be changed, so it can be healed. It's just like a fight with your wife. He brings the issues up again so they can be healed. And it has to be God's church. It has to be God's church. And don't get me wrong, I love people on news outlets, ranting and raving. I love their energy and I love where they're going with this. But those guys do not have the solution. I'm just going to tell you truthfully. I love their passion, I love their energy, and I love the things they're saying. And they're part of what needs to happen for us to get healing, but they are not the answer. We need the answer. We've taken the advice of men for far too long. We've let men control this for far too long. We need healing. We need answers, and we don't have a surgeon good enough. There's nobody walking this planet that's a good enough surgeon to fix this. There's no politicians that's good enough to fix this. It's in the church. It's in the church. It's brought up again so the church can take the lead. That's why I believe all of these things in politics are just leading us back to the church. We can't trust him. We can't trust him, but we can trust God's word. So that's who we need to trust. We're looking for answers when the answer is obvious. The answer is clear.
Mm-hmm.
Rick, I think you had something you wanted to add. I'm getting a lather.
Before Rick said, I got one more thing. And Rick's talked about this some. Just one more thing. Charles Finney was one of my favorite evangelists. If you guys don't know about Charles Finney, there's a lot of literature out there. Read up on the guy. Man, he was a great preacher from New York City in the mid-1800s. I mean, he stood up in front of his church prior to the Civil War. He's one of the only segregated churches in the nation. And he stood up, and Rick's referenced this a lot, this statement. But he said, you cannot be on the right side of God and be on the wrong side of slavery. That's a quote that he had. And they burned his church down. So in 1850, they burned his church down. But in 2020, here we are. The church must stand up and say, we cannot be on the right side of God and be on the wrong side of this race issue. And Rick's talked about that a lot, but I just think back to those words of Charles Finney. And we have to be on the right side of this issue, guys. We have to be on the right side of this issue.
Can you guys hear me? Got me? I want to finish this off with the thought that we'll eventually end up at, after there are several things God wants us to hear, some things I think that Osh and Dion have to say that we need to hear. Want them to lead these discussions. Thanks to everybody who's. I just sat here tonight and thought how proud I am of our little group of ragamuffins. Man, strong. I mean, it's a strong group. The things that you shared from Mimi and Jill, Gary and Isaac, and just the things that are there that even people that didn't talk have to say. I mean, we may be Gideon's little small army like Gideon in the Old Testament, but man, this is a strong, deep group of people. I think you know that, but every time we do this, I don't think there are many church groups, no matter how small or big they are, that are having this conversation right now like this. Maybe they are, I hope they are, but I don't know that they're having this specific level of this conversation. It'd be wonderful if they did. As from a minister's perspective and a spiritual place, I want to take us to what was going on in the spirit realm, because Isaac hit on, I don't think it was an accident. Johnny just texted me. He said, it's not a coincidence that you were talking about Ecclesia Rising and Ecclesia Rising, two parts of that. And he said, you talked about, we have to identify the gates of hell, and then we have to legislate against the gates of hell that are there. And he said, isn't it funny that the first gate of hell that rises right after you talk about the Ecclesia is racism? And he basically is asking me, I want to hear from you as our set man, how are we going to deal with this? Well, I wish I had all those answers to that specific question. But part of how we're going to deal with it, guys, I want to give you two thoughts, and I want to pray. I'm going to ask Dion to pray with me as we close this down. Okay. At the root of this, we're dealing with an iniquity. And I'm going to eventually teach on this, okay? Iniquity is different than sin. And so people look at the sin of slavery and the sin of Jim Crow and the various external sins, even what happened to George Floyd. They see an external sin, and we don't address the internal iniquity. The Bible says that Jesus was wounded for our sins. He was bruised for our iniquities. So he had an external wound for an external act. He had an internal wound for an internal heart problem. And so what's happened is for 400 years, we have internal iniquities in both white and black and brown and yellow for that matter. There are iniquities that are flowing from the bloodstream through everything Isaac talked about of various kinds and feelings and bents and attitudes of superiority to unforgiveness and resentment and all the stuff that's there is an iniquity. And so the outer actions may have stopped, but the internal attitudes have remained. And those internal attitudes are called iniquities. And if we're going to defeat this as the body, the government can't go after iniquity, only the church can. And so if we're going to defeat this as the body of Christ, as the spiritual legislative assembly, we've got to go after and address the iniquities that are in the heart of men that are flowing through the bloodlines until everyone on all sides of this gets free. And I want to pray over the iniquity. I want to just as a first little drop tonight, because of how the level of depth that we happen to go into this, I'll eventually teach on iniquities and how it's flowing through the bloodline. It flows through your family bloodlines. It flows through my family bloodlines. Every individual's family bloodlines has iniquity, but our nation has iniquity flowing on the internal heart of man. It just does. And until we can't just address the external sins. We have to address the internal iniquity, and we're going to get to it. And that's the root way we have to deal with this. And we as a people, as a church, as High Point Church, as our group, as our church body, we have to model that. We can't look to the media or Hollywood or government to do that. Only the church can model the freedom we can get from being free from iniquity until we're really all equally one. So I want to pray over that, and I want to just drop the first nugget or the first little thought in your spirit that we have to get free from iniquity. We have to dive into the heart of man and the things that are flowing down on all sides of the superiority, the pride, the resentment, the unforgiveness, the anger, all of the things, the hatred, the bitterness. It's internal, and unless we get free from that, it's going to eventually pop out again. Eventually, we have to address the heart of man. So I want to pray over the iniquity that's in the heart of our nation, and then we'll kind of bring this to a close and just say that, man, I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud of everybody that shared and what God's doing here. I want to echo what Dion said. Malcolm, man, you just blessed my socks off when you jumped in, bro. Love it when you share. I know you don't talk a lot, but when you do, it is potent, my man. I mean, that was just strong, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was just so strong. So I am praying now that God increases our diversity during these times, that during this season we're in right now, that God actually increases the diversity of our group. And I think this is a diverse group, but it can be increased to the point that they can't label us, as Asha said for so long. So if it's okay with you, I want to pray over iniquity, and I want to pray over our nation. And I'm going to pray, but I want Dion to finish us, if you would. Pray over that too, just the heart of man, just the iniquity that's in the bloodstreams. But as a white guy and a black guy, pray over the iniquity that's been flowing in our nation for hundreds of years. And I know I've asked Dion this a lot. He and I know Isaac too, they're not trying to make white people feel guilty. They're trying to get us to understand so we can get free from it. Okay? That's the point. Just understand so we can get free from it, because I can promise you, this is the perspective of most Native American and Black American people. That's the way they view history, right?
Yeah.
That's the way they see it. And so we have to deal with it and talk about it in order to get free from it. So I'm going to pray over iniquity. And I thank you guys for everything you shared. In the coming weeks, it's going to just keep getting good, keep getting stronger and stronger. Father, we love you. And we thank you that you have shown up and you have arrived in America at this specific time to deal with this specific issue. And Father, I pray that we would be a people that would speak to this issue. And Father, I pray that as we look at the things going on in our nation, that when we see the people protesting, when we see the different groups protesting, that, Father, we would look at them and we would see the pain and we would not see a problem. Because I think some people see it and they see a problem, and other people see it and they see the pain. But we're going to be a people that see the pain of the situation, see beyond just the chants and the rallies, and see the pain underneath that. Don't see it as a problem, see the pain that's there. And I pray your people would recognize the pain, because Jesus, you saw the pain. When you saw people, you saw the pain that was going on with them. And Father, I pray right now that you would begin to address the iniquities in the hearts of man. That, Father, in white men, black men, Native American men, Hispanic, whatever situation they find themselves in, Father, that you would begin to dig into and deal with the roots of iniquity that are flowing in the bloodstream of America. We've talked about the two streams in American history. There's an ungodly, polluted stream, and Isaac talked about that ungodly, polluted history. And there's a godly stream that has flowed through American history to try to make America a city on a hill. And right now, Jesus, we need the godly stream to overwhelm the ungodly stream and heal it and bring restoration and reconciliation. We need it from black men, white men, Native American men. We need it from all men. Right now, we need the godly stream that's been flowing through every culture to rise up and bring healing to this nation. So, Father, we address the iniquity that's in the heart of this nation and in the hearts of men. Every bit of pride and superiority, every bit of anger and resentment. Father, we will, as a body of Christ, pray and preach, and in that way legislate to humanity the decrees of God in this hour. That there is an iniquity in our heart. There is an iniquity in the heart of this nation. And the iniquity can only be set free by the wounds of Jesus. He was bruised for our iniquity. And only in the sacrifice of Jesus, there's no piece of legislation. Father, we need acts of kindness, not acts of Congress right now. That's not what we need. We need acts of kindness, not acts of Congress. And so, Father, I pray that you would rise up in your body and you would release kindness and compassion and love until the iniquities that have held this nation bound for centuries begin to fall off like shackles. Every iniquity of anger, every iniquity of hatred, all the iniquity of bitterness, the iniquities of resentment. Lord, let forgiveness and unforgiveness be released. Let repentance come where it needs to come. But Father, let the iniquities in the heart of men change in this hour. Beyond just facts in our mind, and I want us to be educated, beyond just excitement in our emotions, God, go deep to the spirit of this nation and bring freedom from every iniquity, all the iniquity that's rooted in there of racism and bigotry and prejudice. Dig it up, Jesus. And one day, eventually in the weeks to come, I will teach on it. And Father, I pray that we would be a people that address the iniquity, bring healing to the iniquity, because Jesus, you want to set us free from the iniquity. It's the iniquity that we've got to conquer. There was a generation that had to conquer the sin of slavery. We're a generation that has to conquer the iniquities of the heart if we're going to truly be a people united. Because in the end, they will find all kinds of mechanisms and schemes in their different business and practices and all their ways. They'll figure out a way to scheme it and keep the same stuff in place if we don't get people free from the iniquity. And I pray for that in Jesus' name. Okay. If you can, that's what I'm using.
I was gonna pray, but I think Rick got it all. My goodness. But I will say, just again, thank you to all of you guys for just sharing and being willing to listen. It doesn't have to be. It won't be just right after this conversation or the next conversation or the next conversation, but we move in the right direction if we start listening. And like Isaac and like Rick have both said, it's got to be the church, man. And we have hope because of this group. This world, this nation has hope because of the people in this group and people like us across the nation. It really is that simple. We have hope because of the way that Angelica and Malcolm and Mimi and Chris are raising their kids. We have hope because they're willing to have those conversations. And the way Gary has raised Mimi and the way Olga has raised Mimi. And all of those things are why we have an opportunity to get this thing right and to change it for the better. So I don't have a prayer, but I'm just feeling grateful and gratitude for each of you and just for your hearts and just for the encounters that you guys have had with Jesus. And that's really the only way that this thing turns. It really is.